What if the person you hurt the most is the one you end up loving the most? Catherine had always been just another worker to him, the CEO who cared only about business. But when he fired her, he never thought he would miss her. Now, with her gone, he feels something he can't ignore. Stay with us to find out if it's too late for him to change and win her back. Catherine had always admired the strength and determination of Alexander, the CEO of one of the most successful companies in the city. He was everything she wasn't, cold, driven, and focused only on the business. She was the opposite, warm, caring, and always ready to put others first. They made an odd pair, but there was something about the way they worked together that made everything feel right. But over time, their connection began to change. Alexander grew more distant as his focus on work consumed him, while Catherine became more frustrated with the lack of appreciation for everything she did. She gave so much of herself to that company, but it never seemed to be enough for him. She didn't want to leave, but when he suddenly fired her, she knew it was over. As Catherine walked out of that office for the last time, she couldn't help but feel a weight lifting off her shoulders. She thought she was free from his cold control. But deep down, a small part of her missed him, more than she wanted to admit. Alexander, on the other hand, didn't understand what was missing at first. He felt nothing but relief when she was gone, until he came back to an empty office, a space that felt strangely silent without her presence. The more he tried to focus on work, the more he realized that something was wrong. He couldn't stop thinking about Catherine. The anger, the pride, the coldness, they all started to melt away. This was a story about two people, each on their own journey, one running from love, the other searching for it. But what happens when they collide again? Will Alexander realize too late how much he needs her? And will Catherine let him back in after everything he's done? Through misunderstandings, personal struggles, and emotional growth, their paths are about to cross once more. But the question remains, can love bring them back together? Or has time made everything too complicated to fix? It all started 2 years ago, on a rainy autumn afternoon. Catherine had just joined the company fresh out of college, eager and ready to prove herself. She had no idea that the CEO, Alexander Montgomery, the man everyone spoke about with awe and fear, would be the one to change her life. Their first encounter was brief but memorable. She was sitting in a meeting room, nervously going through her notes, when he walked in. He was everything people said, tall, commanding, with eyes that seemed to pierce through you. Yet what stood out the most was the coldness in his demeanor. To everyone else, he was the powerful CEO with no time for small talk. But to Catherine, there was something else. He noticed her immediately, not because of her position, but because of the way she stood her ground, despite being new. He raised an eyebrow as she presented her ideas with calm precision, unbothered by his intense gaze. He didn't say much during the meeting, but when it ended, he pulled her aside. "You have potential, Catherine. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That single moment left her speechless. No one had ever spoken to her like that, especially not someone like him. But even then, she didn't realize that it was the beginning of something neither of them could fully understand. Over the next few months, their professional relationship grew. Catherine proved herself as an invaluable asset to the company, earning Alexander's respect with each passing day. And as she did, something shifted between them. They found themselves working late into the night, discussing everything from business strategies to personal beliefs. They laughed together, debated fiercely, and even shared moments of vulnerability. For the first time, Catherine saw past his icy exterior and into the man he was, someone burdened by expectations, afraid to trust anyone. But he began to trust her, in small ways at first, asking for her opinion on crucial decisions, listening to her ideas. And soon, those moments of connection turned into something deeper. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Alexander found himself standing too close to Catherine in the dimly lit office. She was tired, her hair a little messier than usual, but to him, she looked perfect. He had never seen her like this before, so real, so raw. And for a moment, he couldn't breathe. Their eyes locked, and the silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. Catherine felt it too, the pull, the electricity that had been building between them. Without thinking, She reached out to adjust his tie, her fingers brushing against his skin. It was just a small gesture, but it felt monumental. The world outside seemed to disappear as they stood there, frozen in time. But that moment never turned into anything more. The door to the office swung open, and the spell was broken. They both stepped back, uncomfortable and unsure of what had just happened. Catherine brushed it off with a smile, though inside, her heart was racing. Alexander, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that he had been on the verge of something that could change everything. And then, the unthinkable happened. Alexander walked into her office one morning, his face a mask of cold indifference, and told her it was time for her to leave. No explanation, just go. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had no idea what had happened. One moment she was working side by side with him, and the next she was standing outside the building, trying to make sense of everything that had just unfolded. The truth was, Alexander didn't understand what he was doing. But deep down, he knew he couldn't let his guard down, not even for her. So, he made the decision to push her away before he could get too close. The emotional distance he created was meant to protect both of them, but it only left a gaping hole in his heart. Catherine never understood why he did it, but in time, she realized it didn't matter. She had to move on. And she did. But as the days passed, she couldn't forget the man who had left an indelible mark on her heart. But little did they know, their story wasn't over yet. And soon Alexander would realize that the hardest thing he ever had to face was the woman he had let go. The office was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the computers and the occasional shuffle of papers. But for Alexander, it felt as if the world had become deafening. Every corner of his life, every piece of his empire, seemed incomplete without her presence. He couldn't focus, his mind constantly drifting back to Catherine, to the laughter they once shared, to the warmth she brought into his cold, structured world. He had fired her, pushed her away, telling himself it was for the best, that it was easier this way. But now, the silence in his office was a constant reminder of his own loneliness, his life, his work, his success. It all seemed so insignificant without her. But still, he couldn't bring himself to reach out. He was the CEO, the one who held everything together. What would happen if he let her back in? What would people think? There was too much at stake, too much to lose. His responsibilities, the expectations, these were things he couldn't abandon. And yet, there was this gnawing feeling that something was missing. His life felt hollow without her in it, like he was walking through a dream he didn't want to wake up from. But waking up meant facing the truth, that he could never be the man he truly wanted to be with her by his side. He had convinced himself that his ambitions, his legacy, were enough. But now, every corner of his office reminded him of what he had given up. Meanwhile, Catherine was struggling to move on. She had told herself that she would rebuild, that she would find new meaning outside of him. She had found a new job, new friends, and she thought maybe she was finally starting to heal. But each day felt like a battle. The memories of Alexander, of the love they shared, the promises they made, haunted her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had thought she could bury it, that time would heal the wound, but every time she saw a glimpse of him in the news or heard his name, it all came rushing back. She had given so much to him. Her heart, her trust, and he had turned his back on her. The betrayal cut deeper than she had let herself admit. She had to move on, she told herself, but no matter how hard she tried, the ache remained. She missed him, even though she knew she shouldn't. She missed the way he made her feel like she mattered, like she was important. But he didn't feel the same, and deep down, she knew that she couldn't go back to that place, to that pain. But the truth was, she wasn't sure she could move on either. She still found herself thinking about him, wondering what he was doing, wondering if he ever thought about her the way she thought about him. She wasn't supposed to care anymore, but she did. And that made it harder to keep pretending that everything was fine. As the days passed, the gap between them only seemed to widen. Alexander, bound by the expectations of his family and his position, couldn't bring himself to cross the line. His duties as CEO, the legacy he was meant to uphold, were things he couldn't risk for the sake of his own happiness. But every time he saw her face in his mind, every time the memories of their shared moments came flooding back, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had made a mistake. But was it too late? Could he still reach out to her? Would she even want to hear from him after everything he had done? He wasn't sure anymore, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. He had always prided himself on control, on being the one who called the shots. But in this, he had no control. His heart had betrayed him, and now he was left wondering if it was too late to fix what he had broken. Catherine, too, found herself at a crossroads. She had once believed in love's power to overcome anything, but now, with her heart still aching, she couldn't help but question whether it had all been a lie. She had been so sure that their love was different, that it could withstand anything. But when he had walked away, it had shattered her in ways she hadn't been prepared for. She had built a new life for herself, or at least she had tried to. She had convinced herself that she didn't need him, that she was better off without him. But when she closed her eyes, his face was still there, haunting her, reminding her of the love they once shared. She wasn't supposed to want him anymore. She wasn't supposed to need him. But every day the feelings lingered, just beneath the surface, refusing to fade. The conflict between them wasn't just emotional, it was something deeper. Alexander had a legacy to protect, a family who expected him to carry on their name, their empire. He wasn't just a man, he was the heir to a powerful line, and that came with sacrifices. His heart, his desires, were secondary to the greater good. And Catherine was someone who had once believed in the kind of love that could conquer anything. But now, after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure if she could trust in that kind of love again. She wasn't sure if she could trust him. Both of them were caught in a web of their own making. Their love was still there, but the circumstances that had torn them apart had built walls that neither knew how to break. They both wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance between them, but fear and pride kept them stuck. The time that had passed made it harder to imagine a future together, but the pain of letting go made it even harder to let go. They were both waiting, for the other to make the first move, for the right moment, for something to shift. But in the meantime, the silence between them stretched on, growing louder with each passing day. The question was, would they ever find the courage to take the step that would bring them back together, or would they remain trapped in their own doubts, forever wondering what might have been? The night was cold, the city lights flickering against the wet pavement as Catherine stood outside Alexander's office. She had promised herself she wouldn't come back, that she wouldn't give him another chance to hurt her. But here she was, her hands clenched into fists, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed answers. She needed closure. Alexander hadn't expected to see her. The moment she walked through the doors, his breath caught in his throat. She looked the same, yet different, stronger but still carrying the same fire in her eyes that had always drawn him in. He wanted to speak, to say something, but he didn't know where to begin. She broke the silence first. Why? Her voice was steady, but there was an edge of pain beneath it. Why did you let me go? Why push me away only to look at me like you never wanted me to leave? He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You think it was easy for me? His voice was low, rough with emotion. You think I wanted to let you go? Her jaw clenched. Then why did you? His hands curled into fists at his sides. Because I had no choice. The words burst out before he could stop them. Because my life, my world, it was never meant for someone like you. Her lips parted, her breath catching. Someone like me? His chest rose and fell heavily. Someone I can't afford to love. Someone who makes me question everything I've built. Someone who... His voice faltered, and for the first time, Catherine saw it. The vulnerability in his eyes, the struggle he had tried so hard to hide. She took a shaky breath. Then tell me the truth, Alexander. She stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. If you never loved me, say it now. Look me in the eyes and tell me. His throat tightened. The words were on the tip of his tongue. Words that would set her free. Words that would allow her to walk away. But he couldn't say them. He couldn't lie. Not anymore. His silence was all she needed. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "That's what I thought." She turned on her heels, her heart breaking with every step she took toward the door. Panic surged through him. He had spent so long holding back, convincing himself that pushing her away was the right thing to do. But watching her leave now, it felt unbearable. "Catherine," his voice cracked, raw with desperation. She froze. In that moment, everything hung in the balance. If she walked out, there would be no turning back. If he let her go again, he would lose her forever. And for the first time in his life, Alexander knew exactly what he wanted. Catherine stood still, her breath shallow as Alexander's voice reached her. A storm of emotions swirled inside her: anger, longing, heartbreak. She had dreamed of this moment, of him stopping her before it was too late. But was it? Slowly, she turned to face him. His expression was raw, stripped of the cold arrogance he usually wore like armor. His eyes held something she had never seen before: fear. Fear of losing her. "I can't change the past," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "I can't erase the pain I caused you, but if you walk away now, I will regret it for the rest of my life." Her fingers trembled at her sides. "Regret isn't love, Alexander." His jaw tightened. "No, it isn't. But love is standing here, asking you for another chance even when I don't deserve one." He stepped closer, hesitant yet determined. "I was a coward. I pushed you away because I thought it was the only way to protect you from me, from the life I lead. But I was wrong. You're the only thing that's ever made sense in my world." Catherine's heart ached. She wanted to believe him, wanted to give in to the love still burning between them. But scars didn't fade overnight. "How do I know you won't push me away again?" A ghost of a sad smile touched his lips. "Because losing you once nearly destroyed me. I won't survive it a second time." The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with truth. She searched his face, looking for the man she had loved, the man she had lost, and for the first time she saw him, the real Alexander, stripped of his walls, his fears laid bare. Her heart whispered what her mind still doubted. Maybe love wasn't about certainty. Maybe it was about taking a chance, even when everything felt uncertain. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she exhaled shakily. "Then don't make me regret this." Relief flooded his eyes, and for the first time in years he smiled. Not the controlled, practiced smile he gave the world, but one just for her. As he reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, she realized something. This wasn't the end of their story. Maybe this was just the beginning. Love isn't always simple. Sometimes it's messy, painful, and filled with mistakes. But does that mean it's not worth fighting for? Alexander and Catherine's story proves that even when pride, fear, and time stand in the way, love has a way of finding its path. So, what do you think? Can love truly overcome the past, or are some wounds too deep to heal? If given a second chance, would you take the risk or walk away? Let us know in the comments.